Ohio State is favored by 6 points against Texas going into Friday's game. Ohio State is favored by a touchdown. Am I allowed to be mad about that? We discuss on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Don't know if I need to say this or not. I know it's a Monday. Tony's not on because we did not play on Saturday. He was on Thursday's episode because we played on Wednesday. And so Tony would be on. I'm going to make sure he's on Saturday's episode. We're going to do a Saturday morning episode, most likely, because Texas plays Friday night. So just for the people that tune in Monday to see Tony, I know it can't be a lot of y'all, you know what I'm saying? But if anybody tunes in on Monday to see Tony, it's just me today. Sorry, right? On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we're discussing Texas versus Ohio State. My initial thoughts, especially on the spread. Once again, Ohio State favored by 6 points, favored by a touchdown over Texas. Jeez, right in the second segment, I want to talk about some Texas wide receivers. One current, Isaiah Bond, and two former, Jonte Cook and Ajay Hall. Right? Maybe a name you haven't heard in a while. I haven't spoken on Jonte Cook at all since he's got dismissed from the program. Actually, I think me and Tony did, but it was like very initial. It was before all the tweets, before all the craziness, before he committed to Washington. So I just kind of, put a bow on the Jonte Cook situation. And then I want to talk about Ajay Hall. And then in the last segment, Texas basketball. I haven't talked about Texas basketball in a while. Obviously, things have been booming with football. But somebody got on my ass in the YouTube comments about Texas basketball. And I appreciate that. Y'all know I read comments. Y'all know I respond to them. So this is me responding to it. We're going to talk about Texas basketball in the last segment. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So once again, Texas is in the Final Four. Right. Last year, it was Texas, Michigan, Washington, and Alabama. This year, it's Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Penn State. And that Penn State Notre Dame matchup on Thursday, at first, I wouldn't say sleep on it, but I was kind of, I would say disrespectful in a way, because I was kind of saying like, okay, Texas and Ohio State is the real national championship. Like whoever wins this game is going to win the Natty. It's kind of like when Georgia and Ohio State played with CJ Stroud. And it's like, okay, whoever wins this game is going to win the national championship. And that ended up happening because Georgia smoked TCU. And I think Ohio State would have smoked TCU as well. But yeah, I was just kind of saying like whoever wins between Texas and Ohio State is going to win the national championship. But the more I watch this Notre Dame team, and I like Penn State too, but we've seen Penn State time and time again in these big games, right? Outside of Boise State and, who did they just beat? Or they beat SMU and Boise State, right? Like good teams throughout the regular season. I don't think those teams are on Penn State's level. Like Penn State does recruit really well. They have really good players. But when we see them against the upper echelon teams like the Ohio States or the Michigans or what I feel like we're about to see against Notre Dame, they always come up short, right? They're always, leaving you wanting more, expecting more from Penn State. And I look at this Notre Dame team and they ball, man. Like they ball. I know they lost to Northern Illinois. There's an only loss on the season. But man, Riley Leonard, not the best quarterback in the world, but he's efficient. He makes the right plays, doesn't turn the ball over. Efficient in the passing game, making plays, really good with his legs. They can run the ball really well. They have a nice, set of receivers and tight ends. And that defense is crazy. And so now I look at this Notre Dame team and I say, okay, that looks like a national championship team, and Penn State, they could beat Notre Dame. I don't think they could beat Texas or Ohio State, but Penn State is a good team as well. So, like I said, coming into it, I was kind of like Texas, Ohio State, whoever wins that game wins the Natty. But I do think Notre Dame is a national championship team. Now, there's no question in my mind, in really anybody's mind, that, just from the eye test and what we've seen, Ohio State has been the most dominant team thus far in the college football playoffs, right? Because we've seen Texas play like Clemson and Arizona State, and everybody said, okay, those teams weren't on their level. We've seen Penn State beat SMU and Boise State, and it's like those teams aren't on their level. We've seen Notre Dame beat Georgia without Carson Beck in Indiana, So if you look at the resumes of those three teams, it's almost like there's an yeah, but you know what I mean, kind of next to their resumes. Ohio State, not the case at all, right? They beat a Tennessee team who maybe was a little overrated, but still was very good, right? And they throttled them 42-17, beat them by 25 points. I think it was 21-0, maybe even 28-0 at one point. And then they beat Oregon, who I picked to win the national championship. A lot of people picked to win the national championship. I didn't think that offense could be stopped, and they throttled Oregon. I mean, like, it wasn't close. 41-21 makes it seem like it was, well, that didn't seem close. That's still a 20-point win, but it was worse than that. Like, I mean, they absolutely jumped all over Oregon, and it was bad, right? So just based on what we're seeing, Ohio State looks like the best team in the college football playoffs by a good margin. And I think coming into the year, when they had all those players return, when they went out and got Quinshon Judkins, the way we've seen Jeremiah Smith play, we knew that this arguably was the most talented team in college football, right? A lot of people said Texas, Oregon, Ohio State, maybe Ole Miss. But I think only Ohio State and Texas, you looked at them offensively and defensively and said there's superstar talent on both sides of the ball. And I think we're seeing that show up at a high level because Tennessee can score some points and Ohio State shut them down. Oregon can score some points and Ohio State shut them down. And maybe the worst thing to happen to everybody else but Ohio State, maybe the worst thing for Texas is that Ohio State got punched in the mouth and lost to Michigan, because clearly that was the wake-up call they needed. So they do look like the best team in the college football playoffs. But I feel like once again, I'm trying to convince the world that Texas is a really good football team. And I understand that Ohio State has won back-to-back playoff games by 20-plus points. But a touchdown? And I know this game is not being played in Austin, but it's still being played in Texas, in Texas' backyard. That has to mean something, right? And you're telling me Ohio State is favored by a touchdown? I don't know. Now, let me say that I've been wrong about the spread in both games thus far. I thought that Clemson being 12-point underdogs was crazy. I thought that they weren't getting enough respect. We beat them by 14. I said that we would cover the spread, which was 13.5 against Arizona State. I said we would beat them by 20. And I mean, we needed, a 4th and 13 miracle in overtime to beat them. So I've been wrong thus far. And it opened at 5 points, Ohio State, Texas, and it's now at 6. Maybe it'll even be 6.5, 7 by game time. I just once again feel like I'm trying to convince the world that Texas is a really good football team. We didn't run the ball great against Arizona State, but when we can run the ball, we have one of the best rushing offenses in the country. Quinn Ewers, when he's on, Steve Sarkisian, when he's on, they can be one of the best quarterback offensive coordinator duos in the country. Dominant offensive line when they want to be. And maybe all these qualifiers I'm having to say is the reason that they're, 6-point underdogs. Great receiving core, I think, even with the absence of Isaiah Bond, which we'll talk about in the next segment, kind of the where he's been. And then you look at the defense, the secondary. I mean, Jahdae Barron, Andrew Makuba, Michael Tapp just making plays, right? We've seen, Manny Muhammad get turned around a little bit the last 2 weeks, but even outside of that, you still got elite playmakers in the secondary. Anthony Hill, Alfred Collins, Colin Simmons up front, just grown men on that defense. And Pete Kwiatkowski's unit has taken care of business in big games, right? Going back to 2022, not 2021, but going back to 2022, his second year here, they've always showed up in big games. Then you look at Will Howard. He is 0-4, I believe, against the University of Texas, going back to his time at Kansas State. And we've seen this Ohio State team, not in the last 2 weeks, but we've seen them against Michigan. We've seen them against Marshall. We've seen them in some other matchups not show up, right? Not play to the level of their talent. And I just feel like this Texas team is just as capable of punching Ohio State in the mouth as Ohio State is punching them in the mouth. Yes, Ohio State looks better right now. Yes, Ohio State may have a little bit more talent. But I just have a hard time, and maybe I'm biased. Maybe I have the burnt orange color glasses on. I have a hard time looking at Texas being touchdown underdogs and saying that's fair. Now, the good thing is none of that matters when we line it up on Friday. But y'all let me know what y'all think. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm overreacting. Like I said, Ohio State has won 2 straight playoff games against 2 really good teams by 20 plus points. But favored by a touchdown against Texas, in Texas, I think they need to hold their horses on that one. I think Texas got a little bit more fight in them than they think we do. Quick word from our sponsors, and then we're going to talk about Isaiah Bond, Jonte Cook, and Ajay Hall. A very, very interesting trio of names. Should be a very interesting conversation regarding those 3. That is coming up next after the break. All right, today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by Gametime. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff games is an incredible experience that brings fans together like never before. I remember the excitement of past playoff games and can't wait to make new memories with the updated format and extra teams involved. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't even have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They will pick for you. I have used Gametime Picks to get some great seats for some great events at some very cheap prices. Can't say I use everything that we endorse. You know what I'm saying? I'm not even sure if I'm supposed to say that, but I definitely use the Gametime app, and it is amazing, right? For football, basketball, baseball, everything. The Gametime app is a lifesaver and a money saver. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, so me and Tony have kind of like jokingly talked about this in our like players of the game segments after games, but I feel like this needs like more addressing, like where is Isaiah Bond? Because as much as I talked about it in the first segment and talked about like Texas being slept on or whatever, I guess I was trying to say, it's still gonna be hard to beat them boys. like Ohio State, it's gonna be hard to beat them boys, and there's gonna be all hands on deck. Like this isn't a game where, the running game doesn't have to show up, or Quinn doesn't have to show up, or the defense doesn't have to show up. Like special teams don't, Bert Auburn don't have to show up. Like this is all hands on deck. Like you need everybody playing at a high level to beat Ohio State. And can you beat Ohio State? I know Matthew Golden has showed up, and I mean, he has turned into that guy at the wide receiver position for Texas, which is huge. I know Gunnar Helm is consistent, and you're able to go to him in the big moments. And then, Ryan Wingo and DeAndre Moore have been enough of a supplement at those other wide receiver positions. But this, to win against Ohio State, I feel like we need Isaiah Bond. You need your best players. Isaiah Bond is still one of the most explosive players on the team. And I understand that he has been hurt. Right. I understand that he's been injured. I believe he had 2 ankle sprains this season. And, somebody who's constantly, cutting and changing direction and, putting their foot in the dirt and all of that. Like, I understand that that's hard. And somebody whose game who is relying on speed, I understand how, that could take a lot out of him. Right. I get that 100%, 110%. But he's playing. He's back on the field. And you know what they always say, like, if you put that jersey on, you're expected to be 100%, right? Like, because nobody looks at you when you're on the field and was like, oh, okay, well, he's hurt, unless you're like obviously out there just limping. But when you put that jersey on, people expect you to perform like you're at 100%. And I'm seeing Isaiah Bond out there on the field, and it's not leading to results. In fact, against Arizona State, it led to negative results because he was targeted 2 times against Arizona State, and one of those resulted in an interception. So it's like, not only is it not resulting in catches for Isaiah Bond and plays for this Texas offense, it's resulting in interceptions. Now, maybe Quinn Ewers should have never thrown the ball, but the point is that you went from getting Isaiah Bond as one of the best receivers in the country. He went from being in the first couple of weeks, especially in the non-con schedule, being one of the best playmakers in the country, to now in your biggest games, you don't know if you can rely on Isaiah Bond at all. And I mean, he has been an absolute no-show really the last month and a half of the season. Like, let's look at this. I have this up on Pro Football Focus. But like I said, he's running routes. So I understand that he may not be the healthiest, but he's out there. So let's go back to, I mean, really Georgia. I know he got hurt against Georgia and then didn't play against Vanderbilt. So Florida, he had 3 catches for 55 yards and a touchdown. Okay, that's a good game, right? Arkansas, he had 4 catches for 48 yards. Decent, right? I mean, 4 receptions on 5 targets, 48 yards. Every game's not going to be, blowing the roof off the other team. So I understand that. But now let's look at since then. Kentucky, 2 catches for 27 yards. He ran 23 routes. Texas A&M, 0 catches on 3 targets, 19 routes. Georgia, 1 catch for 22 yards on 28 routes. Arizona State, 0 catches, 2 targets, 12 routes. So he is out there running routes, making himself available, and he is an absolute no-show. I mean, what is that? Over the last 4 games, that is 49 yards with almost 100 routes run, 49 yards. I just don't understand it. It could be Isaiah Bond. It could be Quinn Ewers. But Quinn Ewers is targeting him. It could be Steve Sarkisian not putting him in the best position to play, to be out there. And he did miss the Clemson game, to do the injury as well. So he's obviously not 100%. But once again, he is out there on the field. And I just think that if he's comfortable enough to be out there on the field, then we should expect more production from Isaiah Bond. And to beat a team like Ohio State, you can't have this 1 catch for 22 yards, 2 catches for 29 yards. You need Isaiah Bond to be Isaiah Bond. You need Isaiah Bond to be a game changer. And frankly, we haven't seen that really since the very beginning of the season. And I know he's dealt with injuries, but we need Isaiah Bond to be a factor against Ohio State if we want to knock off this juggernaut right now that is rolling through everybody in the college football playoffs. But I don't want to harp too much on Isaiah Bond, and I don't want to sound like I'm coming down on him, right? Because I understand that he's dealt with the injuries. But this is a production business. Like, these players are getting paid. I've jokingly said it on the show. He has a Lamborghini. Like, you have to be able to expect production from these players. It's just no more, they're kids, like they're professionals. You have to be able to expect production from professionals. And we haven't been getting it from Isaiah Bond for a long time. Like, how would you rate the Isaiah Bond experience overall this season? What is it? 33 catches for 532 yards. He scored some touchdowns, but how would you rate the Isaiah Bond experience? That's all I'm going to say. I want to talk about Jonte Cook. Like I said, I haven't talked about him since he was dismissed from the program. He's now committed to Washington, but obviously if you just kind of follow college football at all, especially if you're on social media, you know that things got really weird in between. He started making a lot of tweets going at some of the Texas players. I felt like he had a lot of tweets that were kind of throwing shade towards Quinn Ewers. He had some tweets throwing shade towards the staff, some tweets towards the Texas fan base. I mean, he just kind of like constantly kept putting himself out there and just kept showing a lot of immaturity. That's just what it is. It's immaturity. You were dismissed from the program. You have to move on and put yourself in a position to go shine at your next destination, which is now going to be Washington. And even with that, we saw, okay, he's getting ready to commit to Florida. And then next thing you know, it was Washington, right? And so it just feels like Jonte Cook is been going through a lot, right? And he hasn't been expressing himself in the most positive way. I'm still a big fan of Jonte Cook. I can't wait to watch him at Washington. I do think Florida would have been a better location for him in the SEC with DJ Lagway, but Washington is a hell of a program. That was just in the national championship, last year, and by the time he plays for them 2 years ago. And it sucks because I feel like anytime that we get a player of that caliber, you want to see them ball out at the University of Texas. And, he was a top 40 recruit from our backyard in DeSoto, hell of a route runner, hell of an explosive player. in the 16 catches he made at the University of Texas, he was explosive. But the reason that Texas is in the place they are now is because they've built up the culture. They have players that want to be here, that want to respond to coaching, that want to play for each other, want to play for their teammates, and want to go out there and represent the University of Texas in the right way. And if you have a player that doesn't want to do that, it's, even as talented as Jonte Cook, you have to let him go. And I know it was presented as mutual, but I think obviously at this point we can see that it wasn't mutual, right? Because Jonte Cook is causing a problem. So all I want to say is I wish him the best. I'm still going to be rooting for him at Washington. I still think he's a hell of a talent. But based on his actions, on Twitter, which we never really saw while he was here, but based on his actions on Twitter over the last couple of months, you can kind of see why Texas was ready to move on, and why he's now at Washington, where you feel like a player of Jonte Cook's caliber, once again, no disrespect to Washington, still a great program, but should have had better options. I kind of feel like he had to choose Washington, coming out of the portal. And you look at it and you see what Matthew Golden's doing. You see what DeAndre Moore's been able to do. You see what Ryan Wingo's been able to do. And as talented as Jonte Cook is, just kind of fell out of the rotation. Maybe we could have made an effort to use him more, but he just kind of fell out of the rotation. So, every recruit doesn't work out. That's kind of the hard part of following recruiting and getting attached to these kids is they're not all going to turn into superstars at the University of Texas. I wish them the best at Washington. But I hope, and I hope, and I really pray that he can lock down, get himself together, and turn into the football player that we all know he can be at Washington. Because I think he has an NFL future, but I also think that right now he's kind of on that teeter line between getting himself together and making it that far, or being another really, really talented kid that just for some reason could not put it together. And I think right now he's teetering on that line. And then Ajay Hall, right, former Texas receiver who shined in the Bama spring game, had like 4 catches throughout the year, was forced into action in the national championship because all the receivers were hurt, had some key drops, got dismissed from the program, ended up at Texas, got dismissed from the program, then entered the portal, was supposed to go to UCF, never went. But now Brennan Marion is at Sacramento State, and Ajay Hall has committed to Sacramento State. And I still think he's a hell of a talent, a receiver out of Florida who's a father, and a former Texas player. And I just want to say I'm rooting for him. At Sacramento State, I'm rooting for him to get it together, go out and play some good football. I don't know what his future is, but he still has the opportunity to play really good football, get an education, and turn that into something productive, right? Regardless if he makes the NFL, the UFL, whatever, he has the opportunity to go out and play football for free and get an education and be a productive member of society. So I'm glad, for years we just saw Ajay Hall in the portal and nobody was biting, nobody wanted him. He is at Sacramento State right now, and I hope that he takes advantage of that opportunity and uses it to his advantage, right? Because, how many people get to go to college for free? How many people get to play football at the university level? And he's getting one more opportunity to do it. This is probably last chance you for Ajay Hall. I hope he understands that. I hope he takes advantage of that. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we're going to talk about Texas basketball, right? Per specific request. It's my fault. I haven't been talking about them. We'll talk about them after the break. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. Visit the website, just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. All right, so I just want to say shout out to y'all. I should have said this at the beginning of the episode. I hit 4,500 subscribers over the weekend. That was that made me very happy, 4,500 subscribers. I was my first subscriber. We started from 0, so on YouTube. So I really appreciate y'all. That really means a lot to me for sure. But Jim Boyle, he got on my ass. He did. He said, I was just gonna read his comments. Why no coverage of Texas women's basketball victory over Arkansas today? He said this yesterday on Sunday, and it's victory over Oklahoma and Norman. The Horns are ranked 5th in Division I. The women deserve coverage. Texas women's basketball plays Alabama and Austin on Thursday. This will be a very tough game, but a terrific opportunity for Longhorn fans to see a very exciting game. You're right, Jim. And when I first read his comment, I was like, well, you commented this on Sunday after the victory, but my video came out on Friday. But he's right. I also didn't mention their victory over Oklahoma. And he's right. This is a really good, women's basketball team that deserves coverage. So thank you, Jim Boyle. I went to his Twitter. I followed him. He has been very, vocal about this Texas women's basketball team and them not getting enough coverage. This team is 15-1. They're only lost to Notre Dame, the number 5 team in the country. As he mentioned, they beat Arkansas 90-56. They beat Oklahoma on the road 80-73 to start off their conference slate, and they dominated the non-con outside of that game against Notre Dame, led by Madison Booker. So, I just want to give credit to the Texas women's basketball team, but also credit to Jim Boyle. He's right. They do deserve more coverage. This is Locked On Longhorns. I should be talking about them. And so I just want to give them their shine right now. Very excited for this team led by Vic Schaefer. And I think they certainly have every opportunity to win a national championship this season. And then the men, right, since we're here, I do know that hold on. Let me find Texas. I do know that their last game was very disappointing, right, against Texas A&M. Their first game of the conference slate, it was tied at halftime. Then they ended up losing by 20. So that's not what you want to see. They did very good in the non-con. I mean, they lost to UConn, and they lost their first game against Ohio State. But outside of that, they were good. So, college basketball, it's a process. It's a journey. You still, got the conference slate, which I believe they'll get better throughout. They're still incorporating Tremont Mark back and, trying to figure out the rotations. Their best player is a true freshman, which at times can be hard to navigate. But, you got the conference slate, then you got the conference tournament, and then the NCAA tournament where anything can happen. And I know there's a lot of pressure on this basketball program. There's a lot of people that, frankly, just miss Chris Beard and feel like the ceiling of this team is not as high with Rodney Terry as it is with Chris Beard. Forever going to be a Rodney Terry fan. That Elite 8 run, I mean, it's probably one of my most proudest moments being a Texas fan of any sport. And I just think it's still early, right? That was a very bad loss, especially the way that they lost, being tied up, halftime and then losing by 20 to Texas A&M to open up the conference slate. And college basketball is one of those things where even like Texas football, but especially Texas basketball. Well, especially Texas football, but even in basketball, where every loss, you just hang on to it super hard. Every loss feels like the end of the world. I still think this team has a very high ceiling, but obviously the women, they're killing it. The men, a lot more question marks. But once again, thank you to Jim Boyle. He was absolutely correct. I do need to, even in the midst of some of the most important Texas football games, to make sure that I'm highlighting the Texas basketball team, especially the women, because they don't get enough coverage. I have the platform to give them that coverage, and I have failed in that department. So I will make sure that I do better at that moving forward. And like he said, they play Alabama on Thursday. Let me get back to this. I know, most of y'all are going to be watching the college football playoffs, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. On Thursday, Texas plays Alabama at 7 p.m. So if you have 2 screens, if you have any way to pull up Notre Dame, Penn State, plus Texas and Alabama, the women's basketball team could really use your support. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.